grateful that you're here. This is the MHA web series on creating a workplace culture of continuity, or a continuity culture in your organization. My name is Richard Long. I'll introduce myself a little bit more here shortly, glad you all took some time today. I hope you're having a good week and that everything is going well. We do have the chat up, so if you have any questions throughout the discussion, you may either put something into the chat and we'll pick that up, or feel free to either raise your hand or just interrupt and ask a question. More than happy to do that throughout the presentation. So with that, we'll jump right in. As we've talked on several of these webinars, we've had different topics, and we thought that as we're moving forward, kind of talking a little bit about culture would be important, and so that's kind of that focus today. So this won't be necessarily as technical from a business continuity or a DR perspective, but really more of kind of that organizational side. So hopefully you'll find some value in this. Oops. Make sure I've got this right here. All right. So just a little bit, if you're not familiar with MHA, some of you very well may be, but MHA has been around for about 20 years in the business continuity space. A huge pedigree of organizations across just about every vertical, from education to the public sector, finance, insurance, construction, retail, really all over the place. Medical, doing a lot of healthcare organization these days as well. So really got some broad experience across many different organizations, both in size and in type of work that they do. You know, the goal that we really have is to help organizations be able to be functional and continue their operations. In the end, that's really what we're looking for, whatever that may be. And really, we strive to try to do that to the best of our ability, based on the culture and the needs of the organization, as opposed to it being cookie cutter. We really want to work with folks and be a true asset. Sometimes we get to that partner word, and it's sometimes just kind of trite. But in the end, we really want to be part of who our clients are, and be part of them, as opposed to just necessarily that partner idea. And we do have some tools if you are interested. I've been looking at those on our website around BIAs, also some compliance confidence, residual risk. So you can kind of look at your program in terms of its maturity, and also once you've implemented or have implemented, you can kind of look at what's the additional risk that still is out there, even though you have put some things in place. And then a newer tool that we have that some of you may or may not be aware of is our BCM 1, which really helps take the plans that you develop, keep them in an off-site, cloud-based storage. And also one of the nice features is it allows you to bring up a map of your various facilities, and you can tie those plans to the various facilities. So if you have an issue at one location, you click on it, boom, there are all your plans. So we're liking where that's going. Oops, sorry. And this was our, just to give you an idea of the organizations that we have dealt with, as I mentioned before, across multiple verticals. And fortunately, in most cases, we're with them for quite a while, at least for a year or two. It's, there are some short engagements, but often we'll come back in and help with other BC needs, as well as even on my side, some of the technology side, we'll spend time with the organizations helping with their IT enhancements and processes. So really, as we've talked, MHA goes across the whole gamut, from assessing the environment, understanding what you need, to the overall maturity of the program, doing actually business impact analyses, threat and risk assessments that you can then pick up, and then moving across everything to helping with developing the plans and strategies, looking at the overall organization risk, especially in the supply chain side, vendor management, and then helping develop the plans around crisis management, business continuity, IT, et cetera. With that, we can also then, really run that whole program if needed, or come in at any point, but help with disaster exercises, walkthroughs, the various strategies and failovers, and actually coordinate with third parties, which is becoming more and more important. And then lastly, just that ongoing improvement from continuing to update the plans, doing training and awareness. It's one area that I know that I've been working with a couple of organizations on, is their training side, and helping them manage those programs, improvement all across the board. So really anything related to business continuity, we can help with, whether it be helping with the overall program or really some point and targeted solutions. So I guess what I didn't talk about is my background a little bit before we jump in here. And I've been with MHA for about 13, 14 years. And really have a technical background on the IT side, helped implement multiple applications, both from a systems administration perspective as well as an application integration side. And then on the MHI side, really helped with the IT services on the technical side, but also cross over with the business continuity. And so we'll also help with business integration and BIAs, business continuity plan development, strategies, et cetera. So kind of go both sides on that, which is, I think, is helpful because there's the technical background as well as the business side. So whichever engagement that we're looking at can bring that experience in on both sides. So that's kind of where this culture thing has come from some of our engagements with other clients. So with that, as I said, as we're going through, if you do have questions, please go ahead and jump them into the chat, or just interrupt and say, I have a question. I'd be happy to do that. So with that, really, what do we want to talk? What do we want to talk about today? Which is, what is continuity versus resiliency? What's changed based on some of the remote work that we're doing? How do we limit those risks and weaknesses, and/or how can we improve our culture? Right, looking at all of that together, which ultimately is the cultural idea. So I think a good place to start is to think about, what is your organization's culture, or what should it be? And there's a few quotes here that I really like. And inevitably, these leaders of industry, that we look to, that have been, progressive thinkers, they really don't hire for skill. They really hire for ability and culture. So, Herb Kelleher from the Southwest side, I think is something that I've always liked, and that idea of culture is what people do when no one's looking, right? Is if you have to have all these policies and you have to be checking up, that's not culture, that's kind of driving things. And then that idea of hire for attitude and then train for skill, find people that are trainable, and the idea, I think, that, culture outperformed strategy, and culture with strategy is unbeatable. So that idea of who you are, I don't know if any of you have ever read Good to Great, that book that was out, years ago, 15, 20 years ago maybe. But one of the things that really struck me from that was the author, who was a Navy captain, used to say that he wanted soldiers that were disciplined. He didn't want to have 15-page policies and all of these procedures. They did because of what they did, what their role was in war, obviously. But his idea was, if I have to tell everybody exactly what to do, I've got the wrong people. I need people who know what to do for the right reasons. And I think that's culture. So he really tried to develop a culture and had a very high-performing troop and a ship. So think about that in your organization. What is your culture? How do you get things done? Do you rely on people doing the right things for the right reasons and we can trust them? Or are there a lot of procedures and activities that have to be checked out and checked over because that's really not part of the culture? It's just a requirement that people have to do, and that's what it's looked at. That's where the checkbox kind of concept comes in from a business continuity perspective. So just making sure we kind of look at the difference between recovery and resiliency, because as we talk about a resiliency culture, these two are related, but they are slightly different, and I think an important distinction that we want to make. Recovery is the ability to make things right after they've gone down. So there's been an outage, and now we bring it up, right? That may include some high availability where things kind of automatically fail over, but typically we're going from down to up, right? They can be both technology and non-technology based, because there could be that time between technology recovery when you have to do things manually or you have to have workaround. But again, it's out for some period of time, and then you have to get your manual workaround in place to start going. And so there's a period of time when you're not working, right? This can either be planned or unplanned, and often it's going to be based on the customer need or the process need, right? We talk RTO and RPOs, right? How quickly does it need to be up? How much data can be lost, right? That's that idea of down and then up. Resiliency is included. You can take recovery and say that's a subset of resiliency. But in a lot of cases, what we like to talk about resiliency is really the prevention of outages. So instead of a down and up, it's no matter what happens, it will be functioning. You know, whether that's that high availability where it automatically fails over, or it just includes the prevention methods of things won't be going down. This can include people, technology. It's really a functional focus as opposed to a technology focus. Often recovery is really technology. That's where the DR comes into it. Now, this resiliency side and some of this, well, again, the recovery is important, and we'll talk about that, because when we talk about resiliency, we don't necessarily think that everything has to be always available, always on, always up, and high availability. That's just not financially viable, and it's probably not, and it's not needed. The important thing is to understand, you know, what's the actual risk and tolerance. And this goes back to that culture. So one of the things I would mention is, does your organization understand what the overall risk appetite and risk tolerance of your organization is? We'll talk about training and things here down the line, but keep some of these things that these questions that we're talking about, these statements in mind, to say, how far down does the individuals in your organization understand all of this, or are they just focused on their day-to-day activity? This is where that cultural change can happen, when everybody understands the need. So from a resiliency perspective, as you can kind of see, it includes everything. It's disaster recovery on the technical side. It's end user technology components. It's infrastructure support. One thing that often is not considered are single points of failure, right? What are those? Those single points of failure could be technology, they could be people, they could be process, they could be locations, right? But what are they? You know, for example, do you know which individuals have such specialized skill that if they're not available, work just stops, whether they're on vacation or not? And that's a question we often ask organizations or departments, is what would happen if, you know, person X is on vacation? And sometimes the answer is they just don't work. They wait until they come back. So that's an important note. One of the things that we're dealing with right now is the pandemic. And understanding, you know, what does that mean? And then a big piece that, you know, organizations are getting better and better at are the supply chain side and the third parties. We are so dependent on third party these days that, you know, and a good example of that, probably some of you were impacted by the T-Mobile outage. I know I was, because I'm a T-Mobile customer. So as I was saying, from a resiliency perspective, all of these items are really critical and important. And so, you know, in the end, really one of the things that we do really well is the technology and the planning, and sometimes the supply chain and the third parties are something we forget. And I think what I was mentioning was, if you think about the third party criticality, is this latest outage for T-Mobile, if that was part of what you experienced, I did, that was a third party that was the problem. It wasn't T-Mobile themselves, but a contracted organization that did some of their services that caused the issue. So looking at kind of the big picture, continuity culture, is really where the practices, habits, and investments of an organizations are oriented toward, ensuring their functions are there, not just recoverable, but able to function always. So you kind of want to look at the risk and the costs. So a couple of things to think just quickly around risk, and that is really the risk acceptance, the risk avoidance, limitation, and transferring. Sometimes we just accept risk that isn't going to occur or that will occur, and we just accept it, and we've got insurance or other things to deal with it. We avoid it by putting something in place. We limit it by putting some type of strategies that it still may occur, but we're okay with taking some of that exposure. And then we transfer it by moving it out to third parties. So hopefully that makes sense, just kind of quickly going through that part. One of the important things also from a crisis side as we think about our culture and communicating things is understanding, what really crises are going to occur. And one of the big things that we see, and we talk about this a lot, is the idea of smoldering versus sudden. And the idea that things that are going to happen have been sitting there waiting to occur all of the time, and we've just kind of ignored it, as opposed to those things that just kind of shoot up. And often those things that all of a sudden it's a crisis, when we look back, it was probably the underlying causes were there, we just didn't deal with it. As you kind of see from this other graph, you see some of the issues that are there, and often it's a human error issue that causes the most issue. It isn't the technologies and outside forces, it's inside forces that are causing our issue. Again, with the idea of what's our culture, how are we dealing with things? The priority for what we look at, this is probably very consistent with what you do from a life safety, incident stabilization, property preservation, and then restoring the business. And most organizations that we deal with, this happens, is pretty standard for what they do. But just a reminder as we start looking at what is the most important thing. So a key piece to all of this is when an organization has a good continuity culture, or it's got a good business continuity and disaster recovery program, it's really about management. It's management that's able to help and push these along. It's not just a task that's checked off so that somebody can either write a report or go forward, but management is always asking those questions and making sure that the staff and the individuals are part of the business continuity. And so the question that I would ask yourself is, do you know where your business continuity plan is? What would you do to keep your operations going if this building or your location wasn't available? And if a certain person wasn't available or people could not perform their duties, what would happen? If a senior leader asked those questions, what would occur? Would people be able to answer the question? And I've had that happen in organizations where management teams will go around and ask those questions of individuals and see what the answers are, because it's important to them to see, is that information bubbling? So one of the things to help with continuity culture is really this idea of communication and training. In the end, that's what's going to help, is that constant communication, constant updating of individuals. So the idea here is being able to communicate and understand, a continuity minute, something that is very quick, but always keeping people engaged in a continuity idea, whether it's risks that are going on to the organization, the next steps that are happening within your program, et cetera. Communicating those risks so that the organization understands what is happening, what have you determined is needed, and then identify how the efforts will benefit the organization. This is probably one of the key pieces to helping with continuity, which is how is what we're doing helping the organization in the long run, not just a checkbox. And then looking at different scenarios. You might look at what's happening in the news today with some of the unrest that's going on, if that impacts your organization. Are there human error things that happen? Are there third parties that have issues like we've seen? And how is that specific to your organization, and how might you be impacted by that? And ask the various departments and individuals, what would happen to your process or your capability if this happened, and what would you do if, right? So again, think specific. looking at, business functions, location, weather services, other things like that that could be impacting at your organization. So again, the idea of making this real can be really, really important and helpful. So a couple of things to think about, one of the things we wanted to talk a little bit about from a cultural perspective is taking into account a dispersed workforce. So as we think about, how we're helping people understand their needs is, with our dispersed workforce, and something that's probably going to continue for a while is this idea of we've already fixed our continuity issues. So we're good. We don't have to worry about it anymore. Our business continuity is done. We can just work from home. That isn't necessarily the case. We'll talk a little bit about that. Or everything will be back to normal once we're back in the office as we're transitioning back. Again, what is actually the new normal? Or we figured out how to work from home, and our people will get better at it, and they'll just kind of figure out their productivity, and we'll figure it out as we need. It's kind of that same idea that we've had of, well, we'll figure out business continuity, or when the event happens, we'll deal with it because we're really smart. We've just kind of shifted that because now people are at home. We've taken one issue of a dispersed workforce that solves some issues and just assuming that everything else will work themselves out as well. One of the things I would look at there is, how did your organization handle that quick move to a work from home strategy? Was it painful? Was it already in place? Did you have anything? Or we can just move back and forth as we need to because we've now figured it out. The reality is there's a lot of disruption by doing that. And I think one of the things in all of our cultural discussions is understanding, when customers will be tolerant and figure out, while we adjust. And I think we're finding that people are becoming less and less tolerant of that. They're expecting us to be able to do what is needed. So some cultural challenges to consider, especially with this dispersed workforce and things that you have to do to help from a continuity perspective, is isolation. What are people used to? Are they getting that personal interaction that they need? From team building changes, economic stresses, if things are changing, if things don't improve, how are you going to deal with those? The efficiency side. It's interesting that as we've talked with folks, many remote folks are talking about they're in more meetings than they were before, and their schedules are more busy because you have to have a meeting. There's no more hallway conversations. Also, those folks that do work at home, they don't really have that personality. They need that structure. And so they're easily distracted because either the kids are home or the television on or something's going else on, and it's easy to do other things. The other item that we're looking at or that we're seeing is that caretaker role, especially for those that have children or others who need care. That's taking them away from work because they can't find that daycare, or they can't find someone to help care for them. And so that's being a distraction, but also what's going to happen over the long term. And then just overall work ethic. I mean, back in the day when we started doing work from home, I was in an organization, and it didn't last long because when people were at home, they felt like working meant checking email throughout the day, not necessarily getting a ton of things done because it's just being in a different environment. And so figuring those things out is important. From a resiliency and a DR or a business continuity perspective, that overall data protection, right, and your home office resiliency, we're now relying on people's home routers, their internet connection, all of their pieces, things that I was dealing with today, as you saw. Those things happen, and what are our plans to help with that? What happens if there's a major repair that's needed in a home? Who's going to take care of that? What is that cultural shift, both from a leadership perspective as well as an organizational one, as well as data protection? It's one thing when we're being protected at the office because we have all of the data security things in places and our appliances and the procedures. When we go home now, great, we have all of that because we VPN'd in, but now we have people looking over their shoulders because a family member comes in and might see something on the screen that they shouldn't. Those types of things. So what can we do, right? What can we help with, training and these cultural actions, right? Is consider, including some type of on-site meetings. Even now that we're opening things up and we can get people together, you still may have that idea of working remotely, but you might want to consider, having certain meetings on site so that people can still get together, but always including a virtual option, right? Some of the social groups to mirror what was done can be helpful. That can help with those training and those concepts. Also, leveraging that new sense of protecting yourself, while protecting the organization, right? So when we think about continuity, we can say, just like you're protecting yourself by being remote, you can also be protecting the organization by doing these tasks, by watching your data, making sure that your malware is up to date, all of those types of things. More training on the work from home strategies, the emotional support and training for changes in the environment, because as we go through that, that's going to be part of that overall help for how do people keep themselves safe, how do you keep the organization safe. And then from an office resiliency perspective, which is really the technical support. And one of the things we've talked with organizations about is how are you doing that? Because now, you might have multiple internet providers. If you're just local to your area, it might just be one or two. But if you've got a broad workforce throughout the country, there could be multiple internet providers. They're going to have multiple technologies, multiple routers, multiple computers if you're not sending anything off from a consistent company laptop or company device perspective. People may be using their personal devices. So those things can happen as well and need to be considered in that overall resiliency, because it might be less of a people issue and it might be now more of a technology and need issue. So what do you need to do first? The first thing is, categorize and update your risks and needs. One of the things is organizations, while they're still performing their function, because of what you're doing now and where people are located, what's happening really should be looked at. Has your risk profile changed? Is there a need to update your TRA? Are your risks now less of a people issue, and because they're dispersed, and so your location is not so much of a risk, but the people and where they're working is. Really determine those single points of failures and any gaps. I think that's probably one area as we work with organizations of understanding what those single points of failure are, and how are you going to deal with those, and how are you going to work with individuals to make sure that their idea of continuity is always being thought of. Because single points of failure, can be a facility, it could be a technology. But one of the keys here is as you're communicating and doing those continuity minutes, is making sure that everyone is thinking about that while they're working. I work with an organization that is kind of demonstrates this on both sides. There are those who are really concerned about the resiliency and the capability of those applications and processes that they're responsible, and so they're very proactive in working with the business continuity and the DR organization to get things improved or to understand what they can do. And then there's others who it's a bother when you go and ask them the question. It's like, I'm just too busy with my day-to-day production work. I don't have time for you. And so we're seeing in that organization that the culture really isn't about keeping things running. It's just about getting my tasks done that day. And so going through and talking about those single points of failure, those gaps, working with folks to understand what they are, and going through that idea of why this is important will help folks think about that in their day-to-day activity. So, when they're prioritizing, when they're doing their work, they're thinking about what am I doing and how would I continue to do this if I lost my computer, if I lost my technology, if my teammates weren't available and I couldn't communicate with them. All of those things are really what we're trying to help change. And going through these again and working with the departments and the management team, to really continue to educate and talk is really what we're trying to do here. Update your communication plan and your strategy around your business continuity and your needs is really what we're suggesting. This in the end is really not a technical type of change. It's a communication and a constant reminder change as opposed to getting all of your checkbox items done. An important piece to this is going to be, how do you continue those social interactions and team building with that workforce that is going to be both remote and on-site? What we're trying to understand is, and we're all learning, is how does a team interact on a regular basis when they have these other meetings that they have to go to on WebEx or through the various technologies, and what happens when people aren't actually interacting. My daughter is a teacher, and she teaches special ed, and the changes that they're putting in place are very interesting, because they work for the most part for the general education classrooms, but she, as a special ed teacher, has some very specific students with challenges, and the technology in the remote just doesn't work. They need different type of social interaction, and so she's struggling and working on, how do I do that in this new environment, because her students' needs are different. It's going to be the same in your organization. Not everybody is the same. Some individuals will do well, others will need certain adjustments, and that goes to the same with the continuity side. So again, kind of short, but really wanted you to start thinking about some of the ideas around, how does your culture need to change? What are the things to consider? With that, again, I apologize for the technical issues. Like I said, you saw the low battery come up. I'm not sure, quite honestly, what happened there, because I had everything plugged in and then everything locked up and went away. So I apologize for my technical problems that caused that, but thank you for your patience. Do you have any questions or comments that we might be able to chat through?